Jimmy would tell a joke. It would take Brando 3 seconds to catch on. And he would,
"Where'd you get the idea?" I said, "Well, I just imitated you throwing a tantrum." And he gave me the...
A man can earn tens of millions of dollars from Hollywood and then choose to live as if he needs none of it. Robert Duvall does not live in a Beverly Hills mansion, no supercars, no private jet. Instead, he retreats to a farm of more than 360 acres in Virginia, where each day begins with coffee overlooking open fields and ends in complete silence. But behind that seemingly simple life lies a paradox that makes many people stop and think. An estimated net worth of about $70 million, a career spanning more than 60 years, yet no children. And by his side is a wife 41 years younger, a relationship that once stirred plenty of talk in Hollywood. Why would a man at the peak of fame choose to step away from the spotlight? What really keeps him rooted in that land, in Virginia, all these years? In this video, we will take a deep look into the real life of Robert Duvall, from his 360-acre farm, his tens of millions in wealth, to the very unconventional choices that shaped who he is. A difficult childhood, years of struggle learning the craft of acting. Robert Selden Duvall was born on January 5, 1931, in San Diego, California. But what truly shaped him came more from a military family than from stage lights. His father, William Howard Duvall, was a U.S. Navy officer who later rose to the rank of Rear Admiral. His mother, Mildred Virginia Hart, was not a star, but she loved amateur acting, and that created a quiet line of influence in her son's childhood. Robert was the oldest of 3 brothers, with William Jr. and John after him. Because of his father's career, the family moved constantly, especially between Annapolis and Northern Virginia. A childhood built on constant adjustment gave Robert his calmness, endurance, and habit of keeping to himself. Later on, people would see discipline, toughness, and persistence in him, but those traits did not appear by accident. They were shaped in a strict environment where order and duty always came before emotion. What is worth noting is that Robert did not grow up rigid. Even in school, he was drawn to the stage. At Severance School and later at the Principia in St. Louis, he began to take performance more seriously. This was not yet a Hollywood dream, just a sense that he belonged in front of people, stepping into someone else's skin. In 1953, he graduated from Principia College in Elsa, Illinois, with a degree in drama. But after holding that diploma, he did not rush into film. Robert Duvall's path went through a long and real trial by fire. After college, he served 2 years in the U.S. Army during the Korean War era. Robert was stationed at Camp Gordon, Georgia, and reached the rank of Private First Class. This was not a romantic chapter to tell, but it gave him something important: endurance, discipline, and the ability to handle pressure. After leaving the military, he moved to New York using the GI Bill and studied at the neighborhood playhouse under Sanford Meisner. That is when the real struggle began. He lived hand-to-mouth, taking odd jobs like postal clerk and waiter just to stay afloat. During this period, he lived with Dustin Hoffman and became friends with Gene Hackman, both of whom would later become major names. But at that time, they were all just trying to survive in New York. Robert came up through off-Broadway, through small roles, through days of having little money, but never lacking determination. That period created an actor who was tough-grounded and never needed noise to prove his worth. The first turning point, the journey to becoming a film icon. Robert Duvall was not the kind of actor who stepped out and instantly became a star. He rose slowly, steadily, stubbornly, and that is what makes his career so admirable. His first major film milestone came in 1962 with To Kill a Mockingbird. In the film, he played Boo Radley, a character who barely speaks, yet leaves a lasting impression. It is a difficult role because overacting would feel forced, while too much restraint would make it disappear. Duvall found the balance. He made Boo Radley quiet, mysterious, yet truly weighted. That role helped industry insiders begin to see him as an actor with real depth. After that introduction, Robert Duvall did not explode right away. He entered a long period of groundwork, throughout the 1960s, and that phase became the most important training of his craft. He appeared in television shows like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. Audiences at the time may not have called him a star yet, but those in the industry noticed something clear. Duvall always brought a quiet internal pressure into his characters without showing off. He did not act by grabbing attention. He stood there, said little, did little, yet somehow made every scene deeper. Before the 1970s, Robert Duvall had already built enough skill and reputation to wait for a major breakthrough. That breakthrough came with The Godfather, as Tom Hagen Duvall did not need to shout or display power. He was cold, composed, reserved, and deep. His Tom Hagen was the kind of man who becomes more dangerous the quieter he is, more unpredictable the more polite he appears. The role earned him his first Oscar nomination, and more importantly, made him a top choice for complex characters. From there, he moved through a series of major films like The Conversation Network and Apocalypse Now. In Apocalypse Now, his role as Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore became iconic. The line about the smell of napalm in the morning moved beyond the film into popular culture. In Robert Duvall, people saw something rare. He could be frightening, gentle, broken, or heroic without changing his style. In 1983, he won the Academy Award for Best Actor with Tender Mercies, playing a fading country singer, trying to find his dignity again. It was a clean, honest performance without decoration, which made it even heavier. But what set Robert Duvall apart from many stars of his time was that he did not stop at one peak and fade into the past. In 1989, he made a strong mark in television with Lonesome Dove as Gus McCrae, earning recognition from both the Emmys and Golden Globes. In 1997, he wrote, directed, and starred in The Apostle, a personal project that proved he was not only powerful on screen, but also had his own voice behind it. Moving into the 2000s, he maintained his form with Open Range, Get Low Cars, and The Pale Blue Eye. More than 100 credits, 7 Oscar nominations, and many awards are only the surface. The bigger truth is that Robert Duvall consistently elevates every film he appears in. Love, Life, Marriage, and Family. If on screen, Robert Duvall often appears as a reserved and somewhat distant man. His love life reveals a much softer portrait. He has been married 4 times. At first glance, many might see that as instability. But looking closer, each marriage feels like a slice of a different stage in his life, each one marking a transition into another version of himself. His first wife was Barbara Benjamin. They married in 1964 when Duvall was still rising. The marriage lasted until 1975 and then ended. They had 2 daughters, Nancy and Juliana. Even though the marriage ended, what stands out is not the divorce itself, but the way Duvall has still been described as a devoted father. That says a lot about him. Quiet, not showy, but never walking away from responsibility. After Barbara came Gail Youngs. They married in 1982 and separated in 1986. By then, Duvall was already a major name. His career deeper, his place in Hollywood more secure. But with that, his private life became harder to balance. The second marriage did not last, followed by a third marriage with Sharon Brophy from 1991 to 1995. From a conventional point of view, 3 failed marriages might suggest he was not suited for family life. But with Duvall, it may be more accurate to say he moved through love slowly and only truly found his rhythm later in life. The biggest turning point came when he met Luciana Pedraza in Buenos Aires in a setting that felt very much like Robert Duvall himself. Quiet, deep, classic, and touched by tango. This was not just a random meeting. It felt like a rare alignment between 2 people who shared the same inner rhythm. The age gap between them is 41 years, a number large enough to invite every kind of doubt from the outside. But sometimes numbers only create noise, while what sustains a relationship lies in smaller things. Duvall and Luciana share the same birthday, January 5th. It sounds like a beautiful coincidence, but to many, it also feels like a symbol of a very unique bond. Their connection does not come only from emotion. It comes from tango, from a love of horses, from a slower way of life that Duvall has always seemed to value more than Hollywood glamour. Luciana did not enter his life as a youthful accessory to decorate old age. She entered as a true partner. The two worked together on Assassination Tango, and through that, audiences could clearly see this was not a relationship that only existed on the red carpet. They share alignment in work, in lifestyle, and in the way they stand beside each other without needing to show off. In 2005, Robert Duvall and Luciana Pedraza married. After many turns and many relationships that did not last, he finally found something that made his later years feel warmer. Luciana is often described as the one who brought new life into his later years. But perhaps more accurately, she did not change Duvall's nature. She simply allowed the gentler side of him to become more visible. And that is why this love story stands as a quiet answer to every doubt. Some loves arrive late, stay quiet, endure, and still manage to outlast time. A pastoral life in enormous wealth. There is something very unusual about Robert Duvall, and the longer you look, the rarer it seems. He is a heavyweight Hollywood star, yet the way he lives is more like someone deliberately standing outside the showy machinery of the entertainment world. For many years, he was tied to a horse farm of about 300 acres in Virginia, and later continued living in Middleburg, a place known for its rural atmosphere, horses, open fields, and slow pace of life. For Duvall, that was the real center of life. The farm was not a decorative possession to talk about with the press. It was where he raised livestock, rode horses, and kept his distance from a way of life that always demands appearances, demands statements, demands proof that you are still relevant. What makes this choice so striking is how perfectly it matches the Robert Duvall people see on screen. He is not the kind of actor who lives off-screen glamour to make up for his characters on film. He likes solidity, practicality, and order. In Virginia, his life carried exactly those colors. Mornings meant coffee overlooking the fields. Daytime meant household matters, horses riding, and long conversations with Luciana. In the evenings, the two would watch westerns or sit and discuss an idea still taking shape. There was no loud luxury here. The older Duvall got, the more he seemed like a man choosing to live smaller, so the core of his life could become clearer. In that private world, his two most prominent passions were horseback riding and tango. Horseback riding was almost inseparable from life in Virginia, with its discipline, balance, and sense of physical control. Tango, meanwhile, revealed a different Robert Duvall, softer, but never light. He became so devoted to that dance that he made it part of both his life and his work, especially through Assassination Tango. For Duvall, tango was not just a hobby. It was a kind of language of focus, rhythm, and connection. The combination of a man who loves horses and is passionate about tango may sound unusual, but if you look closely, it fits him exactly. One side is discipline, the other is sensitivity. That is also what he brought to the screen for many decades. As for his philosophy of life, Robert Duvall has been fairly consistent. He tends to lean conservative in politics and has not been afraid to show where he stands, even when that sometimes put him out of step with much of Hollywood. But for Duvall, this was not a way to get attention. It reflected his military background, a mindset that values order, tradition, and personal responsibility. He also cared about veterans, which makes sense when you look back at his own time serving in the U.S. military. He never turned those concerns into some loud public image. Spiritually, Duvall was raised in the Methodist tradition. When he was young, faith may have been just part of the family structure. But the older he got, especially after roles like the Apostle, the more he seemed to think about belief, redemption, human nature, and what remains when fame pulls away. What many people admired about Robert Duvall also lay in the way he maintained his body and his rhythm of life after reaching his 90s. At a stage when many legends of his generation had nearly vanished from public life, Duvall still appeared in remarkably strong form. He was even mentioned through videos of himself lifting weights past the age of 90, an image that says a great deal about his character. He did not need to make declarations about discipline. He simply kept training. That body was the result of many years of routine moderate eating, regular movement, and refusing to let age decide everything for him. This also helps explain why in the final roles of his life, he still held onto a very distinct clarity and force. The pale blue eye in 2022 was not a late career glow because people were being kind about his age. It showed that he still had the precision of a great actor. As for wealth, many estimates often placed Robert Duvall's net worth somewhere between $50 and $70 million in the later part of his life. That figure came from film salaries during his peak years, residuals from classic works that continued to be used and reissued, along with real estate and investments accumulated over many decades. But the interesting part is not how much money he had. It is how he spent it. Duvall never attached his name to the familiar flashy lifestyle of major stars. No supercars, no private aircraft, no polished public appearances, just to preserve a personal brand. He was wealthy, but he lived like a man who understood very clearly that money is only useful when it buys freedom, quiet, and dignity. Looking at Robert Duvall, you see something increasingly rare in Hollywood, a man who becomes quieter the more successful he is, and the more he has to show, the less he needs to show it. And perhaps that is exactly why his pastoral life in Virginia was the most accurate role of all, one that required no performance yet said everything about the real man behind the legend in its own way. Sudden death. I am adjusting one detail here to keep this section more factually accurate. Public sources confirm that Robert Duvall died on February 15, 2026 at the age of 95, peacefully at home in Virginia. Information about the outpouring of grief from Hollywood was also widely reported. However, public biographical records show that he had no biological children. His first wife had 2 daughters from a previous marriage. AP News. On February 15, 2026, Robert Duvall died at the age of 95. The news did not arrive in the loud Hollywood style, nor was it dragged behind some last-minute scandal to distort his final image. According to the family's statement, he passed away peacefully, at home, in the private setting he knew best, with Luciana by his side. No specific cause was publicly detailed. His loved ones only said it was a gentle passing, fitting for his age, and for a man who had traveled through nearly an entire century. And perhaps that manner of leaving was also very much like Robert Duvall himself, private, dignified, with no need for any extra layer of drama. What made this moment hit so hard was not only that Hollywood had lost an icon, it was also the feeling that another great door had nearly closed on an entire generation of acting. Duvall was not the kind of star who lived off controversy, and certainly not the kind of name that needed scandal to stay in the headlines. His final years were quite calm, quite clean, quite steady. No public breakdowns, no acts of self-destruction against his own reputation, no painful collapse in front of the media cameras. For someone who had been in the business that long, that was rare. And because it was rare, his passing carried even more weight. People were not only mourning a great actor, they were mourning a way of working that is slowly disappearing. After the news of his death, the reaction from the film world came quickly. Colleagues from his generation saw him as one of the last true standards of American screen acting, a man who could step into a role without flaunting technique and still make audiences believe completely. Younger actors mourned a senior figure they had learned from simply by watching him stand still, remain silent, speak a short line, or hold a pause on screen. That response did not feel ceremonial. It felt more like a collective bow before a man who had taken his craft seriously for decades and had never turned himself into something cheap. There was one especially striking detail in that wave of mourning. Many younger viewers also began returning to old films. They were not watching only to pay tribute. They were watching to test for themselves why earlier generations always spoke Robert Duvall's name with such respect. And the more they watched, the more they understood that this was not just a veteran actor. This was a standard for endurance, presence, and the ability to preserve professional value all the way to the very end. On social media, fans responded in the way this era does best. They brought memory back through images. His scenes in The Godfather were shared heavily. His scenes in Apocalypse Now appeared again with striking frequency, as if seeing that face one more time was enough to understand why Robert Duvall belongs among the actors who cannot be replaced. Many people reposted his Oscar speech, not because it was grandiose, but because it reflected him so accurately, solid, calm, never overplaying himself. Others simply quoted a few of his classic lines, short ones, but enough to reopen an entire era of cinema in the minds of viewers. That is the most beautiful kind of remembrance for an actor. There is no need to say too much about death, only to let the work speak. What matters is that when a major star dies, the public often unconsciously searches for some shocking ending to hold on to. With Duvall, there was nothing like that to cling to. His final years were not covered in scandal. There was no late collapse of image, no controversy big enough to step in front of the legacy. What remained first was the work. Only after that came the private life, and that is exactly what made Hollywood's farewell to him feel cleaner, more genuine. People spoke about the roles, the precision of his acting, his credibility, the character he brought to the profession. In an era when many reputations end in dispute, Robert Duvall left with a record that almost needed no damage control at all. He left behind, first of all, Luciana Pedraza, the wife who stood beside him through the final stretch of his life, and who was also the closest person to him at the moment of farewell. According to public records, Robert Duvall had no biological children. His first marriage was connected to his former wife's 2 daughters, but in official biographies he is not listed as having biological children. Alongside Luciana, he also left behind his brother William, along with a wide circle of relatives and friends who had shared almost the full, long journey of his life. But in the end, the greatest legacy Robert Duvall left behind does not lie in the list of those who remain. It lies in that very hard-to-name feeling he left in American cinema, the feeling that some people never need to try to become legends because the way they worked for an entire lifetime had already made them exactly that. The legacy of a legend. When looking back at the entire journey of Robert Duvall, what stays is not the number of awards or the career statistics, even though he has more than enough to be called one of the greatest actors in the history of American cinema. What sets him apart lies in the way he brought his real self into every role. Without showiness, without trying to leave a mark through obvious technique, Duvall chose to stand inside the character and let the character speak for itself. He did not act to be remembered. He acted as if that was the only thing that needed to be done right. That is what gives each of his roles its own weight, and when placed side by side, they form a legacy that needs very little explanation. Robert Duvall was never the kind of star who lived off an external image. What he left for audiences does not lie in how famous he was, but in the way he made people believe what they were watching on screen. He could be a cold advisor in The Godfather, a terrifyingly calm officer in Apocalypse Now, or a man searching for himself again in Tender Mercies. But no matter who he was in any circumstance, he always held on to one common point, and that was truth. There was no layer of performance covering it, and it is that truth that brings viewers back to his films, not once, but many times. What is interesting is that through those roles, Robert Duvall did not just tell stories. He also carried a way of looking at human beings. He did not try to turn characters into ideal models. On the contrary, he showed that people are always complex, always carrying dark corners, contradictions, imperfect choices. And instead of avoiding that, he accepted it, bringing it into every gesture, every look. Because of that, viewers do not just watch films. They see themselves somewhere in those characters. A part that is good, a part that is flawed, a part that is trying to fix itself. Without needing long explanations, the way he worked was enough for people to understand that a human being does not need to be perfect to have value. From his career to his personal life, Robert Duvall also left behind a very clear lesson. He did not follow anyone else's rhythm. When Hollywood grew loud, he chose silence. When many people tried to keep themselves in the spotlight, he returned to his farm and lived his own life. This was not to create a different image, but simply because it was the choice that fit him. And that consistency is what made the image of Robert Duvall so clear. A man who knew who he was, what he needed, and who was not pulled along by things that did not belong to him. If you look closely, you will see that what he left behind was not direct advice, but a way of living expressed through action. Accept the complexity of being human. Do not try to simplify everything. Live honestly with yourself, even if that means not standing out by common standards. Value important relationships instead of trading everything to hold a place in an industry that is always changing. And more importantly, keep your own rhythm of life. Do not let the outside world decide how you exist. These things were never stated as slogans, but they ran through his life and career. From another angle, Robert Duvall's body of work also carries a very special kind of endurance. The films he was part of do not depend on temporary trends. They exist because of story character and the way he brought them to life. That is what keeps those works from aging over time. Viewers can return after many years, even many decades, and still find value. That is why the name Robert Duvall is not tied to one specific era, but stretches across multiple generations of audiences. And at the end of that journey, what remains is not a list of achievements, but the feeling of a man who lived fully with his choices. Not loud, not trying to prove anything, but always clear. When an actor can disappear into a character on screen and in real life live truthfully as himself, that is when the line between craft and life almost disappears. Robert Duvall did that in a very natural way. Rest in peace, Robert. The light you left on screen will not fade, not because people try to keep it alive, but because it is real enough to endure. If this story makes you revisit an old film or remember a moment when Robert Duvall reached you, take a second to leave your thoughts. And if you want to keep exploring lives like this, people who pass through Hollywood without letting Hollywood define them, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next journeys.
We might talk about some public figures, companies, or social events today, but please note that we are just exploring these topics. Nothing said should be taken as a personal accusation or a judgment. Who should we cover next? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to join our community and stay updated on all things Hollywood. Catch you in the next episode.